Everybody knows what these are, right? Help me out here. It's almost too easy, isn't it? You're like, yeah, we know those are training wheels. They go on the back wheel of a bike. These happen to be Spider-Man training wheels, so these were on a Spider-Man bike. I stole these from Clayton's little stash of keepsakes, but he probably won't mind. Put this on the back wheel, and what does it do if you installed it correctly? It keeps a kid from leaning too far one way or the other so that they can stay up. Now, many of you are old enough, you didn't have training wheels. You just had to figure it out. Balance was something you had to figure out. Gravity was not your friend. But over time, you learned it probably quicker than the kid who put on the training wheels. And we think about, and I just remember, just in the neighborhood we used to live in St. Louis, if a kid was too old with training wheels, what happened? He got made fun of. And so it's like you want to get the training wheels off as quick as you can because you don't want to be the target of ridicule. Did you know that spiritually we need training wheels to keep us from leaning too far one way or the other and falling down? Based on our upbringing, based on our church background, based on how our parents coached us and trained us, based on our friend group, based on our political party alliance, you're going to lean one way or the other. And what's going to happen over time is that you're going to get in an echo chamber, and you're going to listen to the people that agree with you on all the things that you believe, and you're never going to be challenged. And you're never going to think, what does God think? But you're like, well, all these people think what I think, and this is what I think, and this is how I think, and this is the right thing. Because look at all the people who think the way I think. And you take the training wheels off because you're like, I don't need these. And you spiritually are going to fall over time and time and time again. And what's worse, you're going to hurt the people around you as well. See, it's one thing when you've got your 4-year-old out and you're teaching them to ride a bike and they fall and they get a little scuff. And of course, nowadays, my goodness, we've got helmets and pads all over. And the parents run on each side of the bike to make sure little Billy doesn't fall over. But spiritually speaking, if you don't have training wheels, you hurt yourself, you hurt the people around you. Now, as we launch into our message today, we're going to be in Genesis, and we're going to cover 18 and 19. And if you, I didn't click it wrong that time, Garrett. So we're in Genesis 18 and 19, and if you've got a Bible, I want you to turn there. And if you know what Genesis 19 is, this is the passage where the angels come and end up destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's really no easy way to go through this. In fact, whenever you and I think about trying to unpack this and trying to look at how sexual sin of the past affects sexual sin of the present, it's like, well, this is going to get really awkward and uncomfortable really quickly. And you're going to lean one way or the other, aren't you? My hope is that we talk about things that are in the Bible and things that are in our culture the way that God wants us to discuss them. And so whenever you and I talk about anything, unpack anything, 1 Corinthians 13 has to be the backdrop of everything. And 1 Corinthians 13, let's read this together. I know you feel like you're back in grade school. It's like, we got to read the problem. Okay, read this with me. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Yeah. So when we think about anything in this culture, when we talk about speaking the truth in love, two things have to be present. The truth has to be present. Love has to be present. You can't speak the truth without love, because you can say, well, I'm right in what I say, but you're wrong in why you say it, and you're wrong in how you say it. You also can't say, well, I just love people, and I don't want to give them the truth because that's going to be offensive, and that may make people not like me, and I may not have a popular opinion in terms of culture. well, then you're not giving the truth, and you're withholding valuable information from people, and there's this tension to manage. Like, you're going to lean one way or the other, but you got to be in the middle, and like, it's so difficult because there are churches that say, we want to be known not for what we're against, but what we're for. I get that completely. Because there are churches that go around and picket funerals with things on signs about how God hates America and how God hates it. It's like, that's not good. That church wants to be known for what they're against. Well, I don't want to be known for what we're against. But at the same time, can you read the Gospels and see what Jesus was against? Yeah, it's really hard not to. Do you know what the Apostle Paul was against? When you read his 13 letters, yeah, you kind of see that as well. So it's like, okay, well, we've got to speak the truth in love. And then we've got to be careful because sometimes we try to hold those who are outside the church to Christian standards that they never signed up for. So it's like, okay, we know that there's a certain way to live, a certain way to think, a certain way to talk, but we can't impose those values on others. But then, in addition to all of that, their beliefs, their ideologies, their way of thinking is now infiltrating its way into our kids' TV programming, into the schools that they go to, and not as much ours. Like, the county schools are different, but like on the East Coast, what they're being taught, what they're being indoctrinated with, what their young, impressionable minds are being fed and they're adopting as fact, it's dangerous and wicked stuff. In fact, just this past week, and I don't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, but like, we've got to get a little bit of commentary where we're at as a culture. Just this past week, there was a mayor in Burbank, California, who was spanked by a drag queen. Now, just for the record, in public, you shouldn't be spanked by anybody. I feel stupid even saying that out loud, okay? But this is egregious, and this is being normalized. Now, even some of his colleagues are asking for him to resign, which I'm thankful for. But what if nobody said anything when this happened? Do you think we become more holy, or do you think they push the envelope and go in the wrong direction further and faster? You look at this just happened. I'm still bothered by a Disney town hall meeting that happened over Zoom in which one of the producers, LaToya Raveno, said that her team implemented a not at all secret gay agenda and is regularly adding queerness to children's programming. So you watch things like Disney, which are supposed to be young and innocent, and then there's stuff that your kids are watching, listening to, being indoctrinated with, and when they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, those minds are impressionable. And the Florida Parental Rights Bill, which has been called the Don't Say Gay Bill, when you read it, and it's actually not that long of a bill. A lot of these bills, like lawyers, they try to say things as confusing and as long-winded as possible. It's astonishing to me. The Don't Say Gay Bill just says, hey, if a kid's 8 and under, they shouldn't be taught anything that has to do with sexuality at all. Because when you're 5, you should be learning how to tie your shoes and what the primary colors are, not trying to figure out, are you a boy or girl? You have no capacity to figure that out. And Disney's response to that is, well, we're just going to put it in your kids' programming. So the teachers can't talk about it, but we'll make sure that they see it. What has this produced? Over the past, however many years, you can see more and more people of each generation are struggling with sexual identity. So the baby boomers, how many of them identified as LGBTQ plus AI and all that? Around 2.5%. Then Gen X, it almost doubles, not quite. You're getting into the 5s. But then millennials, which technically I'm a millennial. You double from generation to generation. Now you're over 10. And from the millennials to Gen Z, you double again. Well, why is that the trend? We've been told that more and more people feel comfortable now in who they really are, and they're more safe spaces, so they're able to now come out. But here's the problem. And this is happening in Europe right now. Of all of the teens who have gender dysphoria, and identify different than what their birth certificate says, 9 out of 10 end up coming back and go, I was wrong and I was confused. 90%. That's a high percentage. I mean, if I was 90% from the free throw line, I'd be ecstatic and overjoyed. 90% in some of my classes, I would have been ecstatic and overjoyed. So 90%, that's a high percentage. So some of these European countries, these different clinics, they're being sued and they're putting a halt on everything. But then like in Canada and America, we're so far behind that, we keep pushing things forward because we're not able to learn from that. There was a Vanderbilt clinic in Nashville that they were going to build just to do double mastectomies on minors. And the entire clinic could be funded by that. Well, if 90% of kids go, I think I made a mistake, then maybe we should just wait till they become an adult to do these things. Now, I'm not saying you should do those things, by the way, but I'm just saying, like, you can't necessarily legislate what adults can and can't do. But with our kids, my goodness, with our kids, they need to be loved and protected. And a kid can believe just about anything you tell them. I mean, at the age of 5, 6 years old, what did you believe? I was told if I ate enough green spinach, I'd be a Ninja Turtle. That's the true statement. I ate a lot of spinach that year. Why? Because I was like, I want to be a Ninja Turtle. Kids will believe anything. They're young, they're impressionable, and the innocence of their minds have to be protected. So here recently, California just passed a bill. And I don't know if the governor has signed it yet, but the critics of the bill say kids can now be removed from their homes if they're not given gender-affirming care. And so I was like, well, that doesn't sound good. And then I found an article that said critics twist California's bill that weigh gender identity support in custody cases. And it's like, hey, these are right-wingers, they're extremists, and they say that, the kids can be taken. That's not what's going to happen. They're sounding an alarm that isn't even there. They always do this. And I'm like, well, I tend to go to the source. You can go to california.gov. You can print any PDF, and you can look it over for yourself. So I found in section 3424 of the Family Code, and I've got a couple of paragraphs here, and maybe you see it, something I don't see, but just tell me what you think this means. A court of this state has temporary emergency jurisdiction if the child is present in this state and the child has been abandoned, as all these conditions have to be met, or as one of these conditions have to be met. Conjunctions matter, right? Like there's a conjunction function that you watched when you were a kid. They matter. Or it is necessary in an emergency to protect the child because the child or a sibling or a parent of the child is subjected to or threatened with mistreatment or abuse, or, so all that stuff that was said could be a condition, or this could be a condition, or because the child has been unable to obtain gender-affirming health care, or gender-affirming mental health care as defined by section 16010.2 of the Welfare Institutions Code. Then you look at that, it's a whole rabbit trail, okay? And it's like, this is about as clear as muddy water, man. So it really depends on the judge that you get. That if your kid somehow gets to California, that kid can be taken from you. Well, it's only a temporary thing. It's always temporary until you don't get them back for a few years. There have been cases in Canada where this has happened. Now listen, I don't care what your political party alliance is. I think they're all evil and corrupt. I think they flip-flop on issues all the time based on what culture their constituents like. I'm not wanting us to vote a certain way, but listen. When you read the gospel, when you realize what truth is, and you realize there's a better way to live, you're supposed to live that way. You're supposed to bring your family into living that way, thinking that way. You're supposed to treat others with love, kindness, and respect. But then when they're innocent people being subjected to life-altering treatment, and this is where I don't know where I land with this. Personally, am I just supposed to sit back? Because like what if there's a kid that's being coached to think a certain way? They buy into this because then they get celebrated and praised by adults that they love and respect. 10 years goes by after all this treatment's done, and then they come back and go, this was all wrong. I mean, you just go on YouTube, you see countless stories like this. They went through a change, and you can't just flip back like a light switch. And they're kind of like, who was my advocate? Who was loving me during all of this? Who was going to stand on truth and protect me? And then you and I, who know the truth, we sit back and we go, I'm not supposed to get political. That's a political issue, and I can't speak up about politics. It's actually a spiritual, biblical issue that politics is hijacked. And just because politicians talk about it doesn't mean I'm not allowed to. But there is a tension because they're not going to think the way I think because they think this is an outdated book. But at the same time, what they think is going to hurt kids. And it's like, man, what do I do here? I'm telling you, I announced my presidency last week. I'm getting flyers started. I'm going to have signs printed up. I want y'all to put them in your yard. No, man. The issue isn't who we've got in the Oval Office as much as it is who is the king of our hearts. I want to speak the truth in love. But man, Lord Jesus, come quickly. I'm encouraged by several things. Number one, Christ is still king. That doesn't change. Number two, the number of Americans who were okay with this is actually going down. You look at the most recent Gallup polls, more Americans are going, all right, we're done drinking the Kool-Aid. 5-year-olds shouldn't be taught this. And people are starting to come around. It's like the harder they've pushed, the more people are like, all right, we're done. We're going to push back a little bit. I'm encouraged by that. I'm also encouraged that as bad as it is, when you look at the first century Roman Empire, when the church blew up and started to flourish and the New Testament was written, it ain't that bad. And the church dominated because Christ is king. And what we're going to read about today, it ain't as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah. So I'm thankful. I'm thankful that our God is faithful to us even when we're faithless, and we've been talking about that throughout the book of Genesis. And I'm thankful that his love is unconditional, and even when we get it wrong, even when the training wheels come off and we lean one way or the other and we fall off our bike, God is there to pick us up, dust us off, and love us well as we try to love others well also. So I want to be mindful of that tension, but I'm worried that the days of just observing culture and just hoping it turns out for the best may be over. What that looks like, how it plays out, I'm not quite sure. All right, Genesis 18. In Genesis chapter 18, there are 3 visitors that come and visit Lot. He's 99 years old during this visit. One of them is the pre-incarnate Jesus, then there are 2 angels with him, and they tell Abraham, hey, by this time next year, you're going to have your son Isaac. He's 99 years old when this happens. He's 100 when Isaac is born. Sarah is 90. They are well past the age of childbearing years, and what this does is it points to God's faithfulness, that the promise that he gave 25 years prior, when Abraham was 75 years old, is going to come not on Abraham's timing, but on God's timing. So Abraham kind of chuckles to himself. He's like, I can't believe I'm an old man, and I'm going to be blessed with this little baby Isaac. Then God tells Abraham, I can't hide to you what I'm going to do. And they look out at Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a wicked area. It's filled with wicked people. And he says, I'm going to go investigate their wickedness because the cries of their city has reached my ears. And if it's as bad as what I see it to be, we're going to destroy it. Now, Abraham knows his nephew Lot and their family, they're still in Sodom. And he's like, well, Lord, and if you want to know the power of prayer, Abraham negotiates with God here, and God does what Abraham requests. And Abraham doesn't say, please don't destroy the city. He says, well, what if there are 50 righteous people there? Are you going to destroy for the sake of 50? I won't destroy. If there are 50 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. Well, Lord, I don't want to be too bold, but what if there are 45 and eventually 40, 30, 20, and Abraham gets him to 10? I'd love to see Abraham buy a car, man. That would have been a great sight to behold. So he's like, finally God's like, if I find 10 righteous people there in the entire city, there are thousands and thousands of people. If I find 10, that's basically 2 households, right? If there are 2 families there that are not as wicked, then I won't destroy the city. And then it says 2 angels go into Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's an indication that maybe the pre-incarnate Jesus hangs back or goes back to be with the Father, and the 2 angels go into the city, and they're going to do some investigating. Now, people know how this story plays out, but let's just try to read it with fresh eyes and see how this all looks. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gateway of the city. This probably indicates that Lot had some prominent position, like he was on the city council, or he was one of the elders of the city. This is why he's in the position that he's in. It's his job to welcome people as they come in. He gives them the little packet, hey, welcome to Sodom, that's where the shops are, and there's the restaurants over there. And like his job is to be a representative of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. So Lot recognizes these aren't just 2 dudes that are walking in. He probably recognizes they're angels. And he says, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house. You guys need to come to my house, because I know what happens here, and you're not going to like what happens here. So if you come to my house, then you're protected, and you don't have to worry about anything. And he says, you can wash your feet, spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we're going to spend the night in the square so that we can see everything that happens when the sun goes down. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him, and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them. He shut the door behind him, and he said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do to them whatever you like. Now, this doesn't tell us what should happen. It tells us what happened, okay? So Lot is a coward. In their culture, you bring people in your house, you protect them at all costs. It's the shame and honor system is a different type of culture, but this is horrific. It is horrendous. And just like you've got angels inside your house with you, I'd be like, you guys don't know, like, I'll open the door and I'll send them out, and you guys aren't going to like what's going to happen. I think they have like lightsabers. That's not a thing yet, but like angels, you don't mess around with angels. Why is Lot offering up his daughters, who he's also supposed to protect, and try to save the angels? The reason is because he probably knows what the angels have come there to do. And he's trying to save the wicked men of the city. So he's going to sacrifice his daughters for the sake of wicked people. That is not the way that you're supposed to do life. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the roof of my protection. This is their guy's response. Get out of the way. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. And they kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out, and they pulled him back in the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door, young and old, with blindness, so they could not find the door. And by the time, hold on, let me go back. Let me summarize. So he brings them in, the angels bring him in, they're like, hey, this city's going to be destroyed. You need to get out. Do you have family here? And he's like, yeah, I've got guys that are engaged to my daughters. It's like, well, this is weird, but get them, get your wife, get out of here. They wait till morning before they're going to leave. The sons-in-laws, they don't believe anything bad is actually going to happen. They kind of laugh it off. So they end up getting destroyed with everybody else in Sodom. And as they leave, the angel's like, you need to get up, you need to go. God's about to send burning sulfur from heaven. We can't do anything until you guys get out. So get out now. And as they start to make their way out, they're going to go to this little village kind of close. And what happens to Sodom is an event that is known to people who don't even know the Bible. And it's interesting that it's backed up by archaeology. I'll talk about that in a second. It says, by the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. The Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heavens. So they found ruins, archaeological ruins, of what looks like 10 times the atomic blast of Hiroshima that went off over these cities in the area of Sodom and Gomorrah at the same time period that this would have happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. And they said the heat was so intense that everything just kind of like melted together. And there was like some type of comet that came into the atmosphere and exploded, and all of the heat went straight down. Now, that's funny to me, because the archaeologists who don't have a belief in the Bible, they say, listen, it may have been the same time as Sodom and Gomorrah, the same place as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the same thing that happened to Sodom and Gomorrah, but it probably isn't really Sodom and Gomorrah. We can't prove that it was the Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, give me the football. I'll carry it into the end zone for you. This was Sodom and Gomorrah. We have archaeological evidence that it was destroyed in the way that they say, and it's crazy to me that it's all backed up, okay? Verse 25, thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation of the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And when we read this, and everybody knows this story as well, we think that she was just like heard the chaos and was like, oh my goodness, and she looked back, and then she just turned into a pillar of salt. But the word for looked back is a longing gaze and stare, meaning she looked back and said, I really like living there. I really like the things that we did there, and I wish it wasn't going to be destroyed. The book of Proverbs says, like, don't envy wicked people. Don't live as they do. The fun that they have is not fun. It leads to destruction. But she looked back and goes, man, it was fun. I really like living there. I hope we can rebuild a type of Sodom somewhere else. And she turned into a pillar of salt because her looking back was a longing to participate in the sin. I think it's interesting, too, that in the Bible, you and I are called salt and light. We are to be the salt of the earth. And here, she literally becomes the salt of the earth because she refused to be the salt of the earth. See, the issue isn't, did they live in Sodom and Gomorrah, even though they probably shouldn't have lived there. The issue isn't where you live and what your environment is. What the issue is, does your environment have a hold of your heart? Are you in Sodom? Somebody's got to be there to preach and evangelize. The question is Sodom in you? So whenever you think about the world that we live in, we need missionaries in different countries and different cities in our nation that are very far from God and do horrendous and horrific things. We need people there preaching the love of God, don't we? The issue isn't, are you in Burbank, where that first story that I mentioned happened, but of the ideologies of Burbank in you. Here's the response that we need to have to all of this. It comes to us from Philippians chapter 3, verses 17 and following, okay? Take a look as we read this. Join together, this is Paul saying this, join together and follow my example, brothers and sisters, and just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do. For as I have told you before, and now tell you again, even with tears, many live as enemies to the cross of Christ. So Paul recognizes there are people that, not that God has declared them enemy, because God sent Jesus to die for them, but they've declared God their enemy. And they want to live their own way. They want to do their own thing. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to bring sin and evil and wickedness into the world because it's more fun. So they've declared God an enemy. And Paul's like, I cry every time I think about that. And I'm not asking for God to come swiftly destroy. I want them to get it. I want them to repent. I want them to change their lives. And I know, Paul's probably like, I know that most of them they won't do it because they're too stubborn. They like sin too much. And what happens as a result is eternal separation from God. That moves Paul to tears. He goes on to say their destiny is destruction. Their God is their stomach, and their glory is in their shame. Where are they going? Eternity in hell. What is their God? Their stomach. Whatever urges, whatever desires they have, that's what they worship. And the things that they take the most pride in, they glorify themselves in, are the things that make them most shameful in the eyes of God and all that is holy. Their mind is on earthly things. The people who have their mindset on earthly things will always think about earthly things. Our job is to stand on truth and love. Our job is to love them well. Our job is to protect people who cannot protect themselves. And in all of it, pray that God moves in our hearts and in the hearts of the people around us. There is so much wickedness in our world today. And it keeps getting more and more wicked. The thing that will change is if you and I start living the way Jesus has called us to live. We can't be silent and hang in the shadows and hope it's going to work out. We have to speak the truth in love. But love has to be the backdrop of everything we say, do, and how we treat people. If we do not love them well,